Okay, so we now have the Parsha in front of us, Ve'ela Toldos. So the verse starts, Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak ben Avram Helides Yitzchak. That's how the verse starts, translating. This is the story of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham gave birth to, begot Yitzchak. Rashi says, Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak, and he comments, these are the progeny of Isaac, that is, Yaakov and Esau, who are spoken in this section. So let's understand what Rashi is actually telling us over here. Rashi is commenting and trying to describe to us the idea that the translation that the word told us is to be translated as this is, because he's referring to Yaakov and Esau, he's translating the word told us as the word which means children. Now, that's regular. You can translate it as children. But there's another translation that you can translate Toldos to be, and what that translation is that you can say Toldos can mean events. These are the events which happened in the lifetime of Yitzchak. Now, it's in previous occasions, in other occasions in the Torah, we have in the discussion of the history of the world at the beginning of the narrative of Genesis, we have the word Toldos, and Rashi translates it over there as these is the passageway, the timeline of the events which the world has been created with. So that's one methodology, one way to translate it, and it can be used in that context to mean this is the timeline, or these are the events which happen. And post this particular pasuk, when we speak about Yaakov and we speak about the trials and tribulations that he had when he was in the house of Laban and he was returning, we also have the word Toldos used, and the translation over there again is the idea of these are the events or the timelines which happen to Yaakov. So Rashi at this point could have translated it as the timelines, but chose to translate it as to say, no, that this refers to his children that we're going to speak about presently, in the verses presently. So our question is, or a motivating question, we have to understand, why does he want to translate it that way? Translating it as the children of Yitzchak is problematic. Why is it? And in fact, why is it problematic? And again, I'm going to attempt to share the screen. It's problematic because of the continuation of the verses. The verses continue with, and I take it that you're seeing the Chumash now?
Yes.
Okay. So we see that the continuation of the verse is, this is the story of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took his wife, Rebecca, etc., sister thing, right? And we start hearing about that there was problems of fertility in the marriage. Isaac pleaded with the Lord for children. Eventually she becomes pregnant, and and eventually she gives birth. And when her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb, etc. And the narrative of the two children are born. But what is the issue? Right? What is the issue? The issue is that Rashi has made the point that this is the story of Isaac, or this is what Rashi is. In fact, if you look at this translation as the translation that Sfari is putting up, he's actually translated it the other way. He's translated not like Rashi. He's actually translated, this is the story of Isaac. This is the history of Isaac, or the story of the children. But Rashi, right, as we've just seen before, Rashi's translated the word progeny, right, as he's using it over here, right? So these two translations are not in sync, right? But Rashi has translated the version, and this is the progeny of these are the progeny of Isaac, Jacob and Isaac, spoken about in this section. So what is Rashi's, what is the problem? The problem with the verse that we would want to translate it as they've done over here, this is the story of Isaac. The problem is that there is no continuation of what the verse has said. The verse is contradicting itself. If you translate Toldos as children, then you have to read it. You have to read Ba'el Toldos. These are the children, like Rashi's doing. Yitzchak ben Abraham. So who are the children? No idea. Abraham is given to Isaac. The verse continues, and then it continues, and this is and Isaac was 40 years old. Another verse, till we're told that children are born and they're given names. So I don't know about the children. So the verse translated as children is contradicting itself. It is not. It's saying that there's no continuation. There's no continuation of the words of these are the children, and who are the children? No, we're not told about it, and it goes on to other topics. So you would think, at first glance, that Rashi should translate it as that Safari or edition where as translated, this is the story of, rather than this is the children of. And in fact, it gets even more stronger. We can advance this question in even a more stronger way. So at first, we've now said it's more appropriate to translate it as this is the story, or this is the history, or this is the events which has happened in Isaac's life. And if we would continue, there would be a fluidity in the verse, because we're hearing about the issues in the fertility issues that they had in their family. But in fact, Rashi is discounting that, and he's not translating it that way, right? And there is another very strong issue. If you noted, the verse starts off with, it says these are the Toldos of Yitzchak, but it doesn't. I didn't read it. I didn't translate it absolutely correctly. Literally, it says, and these are the Toldos of Yitzchak, ve'ele. And the Medrash tells us a general rule that when we're interpreting the verses, when we have the expression ve'ele, it's a continuation of a theme. It's a continuation of what the previous words and the previous topics are, and that's what the letter Vav does in a sentence. Vav is the conjunctive word, and. So and joins, the word and joins, or the word Vav joins to what was previously. And if we look what we've been talking about previously, we can see that it's conjunctive. So let's just first say that the Medrash, when it says that, when the Medrash gives that rule about Vav being a continuation of a theme, a continuation of the passage, then it also says, and if there isn't a Vav there, if there isn't the Vav expression, if it's just Eler, then it's not a continuation anymore. It's a new topic. It's something. It's something different. So Rashi could have said, and according to this interpretation, could have picked up the translation and said, this is the timelines, this is the history, this is the, as the Sfari is translated, or this is the story of the story of Yitzchak. And then the previous portion comes to a level of clarity. Previous portions, that is the previous Parsha that we read, in fact, spoke about Yitzchak's life, the period of Yitzchak's life when he lived with his father, of Abraham, the tumultuous events of the Akedah, of the sacrifice of Isaac, and continuing on the description about how Abraham found a wife for his son, and they set up a new home together. So that is the timeline of Yitzchak. That is his chronicles. That is his history. That is the story of his events. And the Medrash says Va'ela is a continuation. So it seemingly it would have been more appropriate to translate the word Toldos using the idea that this is the continuation of his life history. And in contrast, according to the interpretation of Toldos as children, the connection between our portion and the previous portion is an issue. We don't see, it's not obvious, a fluid connection with the idea of the Vav and being the conjunctive, the and. There should be a flow between the topic previously to this topic, right? And Rashi's interpretation that this word is children, these are the children of Yitzchak. Well, we've got a problem with that, because if we look at the immediate words prior, or the immediate context prior to this particular medrash, we see a description of Yishmael's children. And in what way is there a conjunctive? How can Yitzchak's children, including Yaakov, who is very righteous, be a continuation of the storyline that we've just dealt with Yishmael's offspring, who were also wicked? So there doesn't seem to be a conjunctive, because Rashi is emphasizing the idea as children, and the previous verses spoke about Ishmael's children, and they were wicked. So what is the continuation with when we speak about Isaac? We don't have a comparative point to go together. So the Medrash explains that in fact there is a connection. The Medrash continues on and saying that the Vav that is there, the Va'eler, is a continuation of an idea. There is a connection between the narratives, and that connection is that just as Ishmael's descendants, which we listed out, were and became negative influences in the world, they were wicked. So also Yitzchak's children became wicked. But however, and the reference there is to Esau and his progeny. However, in order to differentiate between the other child, Yaakov, who becomes a tzaddik, becomes very righteous, the word Toldos is written, it defective by, and it itself is missing a vav. So this idea that there is a connection seems to connect together with the Medrash. So the Medrash says, this is my interpretation. The interpretation relies on that there is a conjunctive between one passage and the next passage. Previously, we're speaking about the Esau's offspring, and now we're speaking about Yitzchak's offspring, and they were comparative. They were conjunctive. They were wicked. Nevertheless, we still have we're still left with that being from the Medrash's point of view, that can be a valid answer. But from Rashi's point of view, we can see that that is not a valid answer, because when Rashi says these are the children, he then says these are the children, Yaakov and Esau, who are mentioned further along in the Parsha. But who does he bring out first? He mentions Yaakov. So therefore, Rashi is quite clearly saying that Yaakov, the righteous child, is the primary one. So if he is the primary one and Esau, the wicked one, is not the primary one, why are we emphasizing and saying this is the progeny, this is the timeline, this is the progeny, this is the real connecting point between this parsha of the Va'ela? Why am I comparing it via the negative? I should be contrasting, and in fact, I shouldn't be in comparative. I should be contrasting and saying these are the differential. So we've got an issue. It's not so clear, and because Rashi needs to, his purpose is to show us a simple interpretation. After all, Rashi, in his self-proclaimed description of his role, is to explain to a 5-year-old child a simple interpretation of how to read the Chumash. That 5-year-old child normally turns out to be very intelligent after we examine it all, but notwithstanding that, it has to be a simple interpretation. So we need to we're going to further examine this idea, but we're not fully comfortable yet with why Rashi has chosen the explanation to say this is the children, rather than this is the story, which seems to fit the more global view of the Medrash, that in fact this is a continuation of the events in the history of Isaac. So we can find a solution, and we can resolve it this way, because the verse starts as Ve'ele, and these are, and it is a continuation of the previous parsha and everything we've spoken before. And the previous parsha concluded with the description of Yishmael's descendants, so then it follows that when I have the same idea presented in our verse, that Ve'ela, that it refers to Toldos being one of the translations, and that translation being children. But although the Medrash said that it wanted to emphasize the idea that they were both wicked, but in our case, though Yitzchak's dependents, in particular Yaakov, were different in nature than Yishmael, but they do have a common element. And that's what Rashi is basing himself and looking for, that running continuous theme of the idea of Ve'ela, that this is a continuation of a theme over the discussion. What is that aspect? That aspect is that, after all, they are both descendants, both Yishmael, what the previous context, and this context, Yitzchak, they are both the descendants of Abraham. And in fact, if we examine the verse, that's how we're reading the verse. We're reading the verse as the elder tells us Yitzchak. And the next word is Ben Avram. So these are the children of Isaac, the son of Abraham. So we now can understand that, in fact, if we think of the more local context rather than the global context, and we talk about the local context between the 10 verses prior to this and these verses, since we're talking about the narratives discussing the children, so Rashi has picked them to say these are the children. These are the children, and that is, it's a continuation of the words, and in particular, the narrative continues a theme of what Abraham was promised. The two narratives that we spoke about now come as a completion and a fulfillment of a promise that Abraham was given. Abraham was given a promise that he is the father of many nations. This promise is actually a promise that Hashem gave to Abraham post Yishmael's birth. That is to say that this is a promise that a multiplicity of nations would come out of Abraham. And in fact, this is fulfilled by Yitzchak having two children, the Yaakov and Esau. And Yaakov and Esau, we are told in the verses, are two nations which are fighting with each other, which will always be fighting, interpreting and struggling with each other. And they are the nations. So Hashem is fulfilling the promise that Hashem has given Abraham, and by the birth of the two children, this promise of the nations and the great nations is being fulfilled. So if we now look at our question and just go back a little bit, when we're talking about Yishmael, the 10 verses before our Parsha, the Torah recounts that there was a promise to Yishmael, and that his nation and his progeny is built, and Hashem's promise to Ishmael is fulfilled, and therefore the description of him and all the children which come out of him is fulfilled. And our section, Parsha Toldos, the elder Toldos, these are the offsprings of Yitzchak, is also the fulfillment of that second promise that Abraham had. That is to say that if we look from the point of view of the context of Abraham and how Hashem has blessed Abraham by Yishmael and by Yitzchak being the progeny of many nations, that this is the fulfillment of that promise. So therefore, rather than as what is initially what we saw as a problem in the translation of the word Toldos, of the word Toldos being children, and saying really it should be, and the motivation of saying that these are the children which we're going to speak about in shortly, we can and we look at the idea of that Toldos reflects the idea that this is the children which have become, we have seen via the promise to Abraham that's come from Yishmael, and the promise of children, progeny that's coming via Yitzchak, through his children, Yaakov and Esau, and becoming nations for themselves. And this promise of this promise of the children is now being fulfilled via the children Yishmael and Isaac, two brothers. They both have the commonality of being both children. This is Yishmael, the son of Abraham, and this is Isaac, the son of Abraham, both being fulfilled. And therefore, the commonality that we're seeking for, that the Medrash has emphasized, that the word Vov, the Ve'ele, is introducing to us that commonality of the Ve'ele. These are, that this is the commonality in that they both produced and children and nations out of them, and they're fulfilling the promise that Hashem made to Abraham for Yishmael, and the promise for Yitzchak that the nations will come from them. So therefore, we now see that if you look at this context, the context of Abraham and how Hashem's promise for Abraham is being fulfilled, that motivates the translation that Toldos means children, and that motivates Rashi's children. And that's what a 5-year-old child would be thinking about. That the 5-year-old child would be thinking about that we've just spoken about Yishmael, and now we're going to speak about the other child of Abraham being Yitzchak and his progeny. So with that, we see the beauty in the selection of Rashi's translation, and understanding what's motivating Rashi to provide the answers and provide the interpretation that he does. The Rebbe has taught us, based on a Shalom, based on the commentary of the famous commentary Shnei Luchas Abris, that within Rashi is embedded the secrets of Torah, if we examine it and we see it, and that we call the yain shel Torah, the wine of Torah. We can find in this commentary, in the idea of children, a deep teaching and mystical insights. The Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, in his commentary in Eira Torah on this verse, indicates that the idea of Ve'ele, the conjunctive and, the Va'ela is a reference to something. The Va'ela, he points, is to the idea of the Medrash, that what the Medrash has suggested, and said it's a continuation of a theme. But what theme should we point out? The theme that of the entire framework of the mystical vision that we have of the Jewish nation and its role that the Jewish nation has in this world. Our purpose in the world is to make a dwelling place for Hashem in this world. Diralei is Baruch B'Tachtonim, a dwelling place for Hashem in this world. And in the words Va'ela, he sees an understanding in that connects to the Medrash and connects to the Rashi. What is that? That the idea that these are Va'ela, this is the children of Isaac, that will be, and the reference is, and the Rashi says, and this is the Yaakov and Esau that are going to be mentioned in the Parsha. He's hinting to the role of the progeny of Yaakov, the Bnei Yisrael, in their role in the world as the Jewish nation, to elevate and refine all the spiritual sparks in the world and bring them back to their original state of holiness from where they are. And that Yaakov has his role, and Yaakov will join together and elevate and to find Esau and all the sparks that are embedded in Esau and refine them and try to bring them up back to Hashem. That is to say, the idea that it's the idea of refining and elevating the realm which in Kabbalah is called Klippa, the idea of a place where godliness is not so extant, it's not so visible, it's not so revealed, it's covered over by some sort of shell. The word Klippa means a shell, and therefore the holiness which is in the world has been covered over by a shell, and it's the Bnei Yaakov, it's the children of Yaakov, the Bnei Yisrael, role to elevate the areas where they're commanded to refine and to make better, as well as when they can, and via the methodology they can, the realms of Esau. But based on the Medrash that we've said, there's an additive aspect to it. Va'ela. The Va'ela connects to the previous Parsha. The previous Parsha was talking about Yishmael and his children. And that is to say that the Va'ela, that the role of Yaakov will be to elevate not just his own brother, his own twin, Esau, and where he might have gone wrong, but Va'ela, but also to be connect to and elevate and to refine the other generations, the Va'ela, the generations, the children of Yishmael, and to be able to refine and lift up the sparks of holiness which are embedded in the realm of Yishmael. And therefore we can connect this whole idea, we can connect all of this interpretations of the idea of being a chronicle, or being the idea of a story or a timeline, or all the history of the events of Yaakov, with the translation of Toldos as being, this is the children, the progeny. Because the most important aspect in a person's life, in the life when he's building, when a person, male, female, when they're building a life, begins as when they produce life themselves, when they continue on the role in order to be able to make a dwelling place for Hashem. And therefore the most important event in Yitzchak's life becomes the birth of his children. in Yitzchak's lives, he went through much. He went through the Akedas Yitzchak. He went through the sacrifice of himself on the altar of Hashem with Abraham. In fact, the Midrash tells us that for a period of time prior to his marriage to Rivka, he spent time in Gan Eden. That is, he was living in the realm of physicality, went to the point of nearly expiration of his soul. He lived in Gan Eden, in the spiritual bliss. But the ultimate time when we talk about Toldos, when we talk about the chronology, when the major event of a person's life, that is the idea of giving birth to his children, of fostering life, of bringing life even further. The purpose of our lives is not to sacrifice our lives. If it's necessary, it's done. But the purpose is not to sacrifice, but the purpose isn't to rise to Gan Eden, because we live in this physical world. Our purpose is not to give our lives away for the purpose, but our purpose is not to be out of the physical realm and be in Gan Eden. The purpose of our lives is to be in the world, in this existence, to elevate the world, to make the world a better place, a garden for Hashem, a place which is fit to serve as a dwelling place for Hashem. And this is connected with the idea of the first mitzvah of the Torah. The first mitzvah of the Torah is be fruitful and multiply, fill up the world and conquer it for and make it a place for Hashem. And in fact, this was accomplished by Yitzchak and his wife giving birth to their children, and through this activity of continuing on the line and imbuing them, his children, in particular Yaakov, and Yaakov's effort to elevate and to refine his brother Esau, and as goes all the other missions that he had in his life, which happens at the end of the Parsha, on his way to going to Laban, to his uncle, and to going to places which were devoid of spirituality, and that being and that showing that the ultimate purpose is the absolute refinement of the world, preparing it for the time when, and making it appropriate for the time when Mashiach will come, which is, as we find as the narrative continues, not in our parsha but in the following parshas, that in fact Yaakov offers Esau, his brother, the capability and the joining together of their resources together to bring Mashiach. So ultimately Esau declines, and we continue with this with our realm, with our struggle, refining the world and making the world and preparing the world still for to be a better place, and to be a place for the revelation of Hashem. And the verse tells us that the Ba'ela told us that when we discusses the beginning verses, the second verse of this parsha tells us that these happenings of the Ba'ela told us, as the parsha starts off, it starts off and it tells us the age of Yaakov. The age of Yaakov is significant at this point. We are told that he is 40, because and a significance is drawn to at that age, that 40, as Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers tells us that 40 is an age when a person attains understanding. A person understands and reaches a full understanding after 40 years. So similarly, the Torah associates the age of 40 with a knowing heart, which eyes that understand perceive, and ears that hears. And that message of the eyes that see and ears and ears that hears, this is a message that we need to continue on in our level of appreciation, in our levels of understanding, and our levels of Torah work, to be able to imbue us with knowledge, to be able to continue the role that the Jewish nation has, that to elevate the world and make it a fitting place for Hashem to will. So with that I wish everybody all the listeners a good week and a good Shabbos, and that we absorb in the message of the idea of the Toldos, that our role is to continue to foster the elevation of the world via education, via knowledge, and via the next generation, to continue it on to Brit Mashiach Tzidkenu.